Good evening, everyone, once again. Thank you so much for being with us and taking or participating in this webinar, tackling the issue of the impact of climate change on women, peace, and security in the MENA region. This is the last one in a series of our webinars on a climate of insecurity in preparation to Cop27. It is organized by the Environment Working Group at WILPF. This webinar will highlight the different multifaceted challenges imposed by the climate challenge on women in the MENA region, specifically in light of the ongoing conflicts and military problems. We'll also present some grassroots solutions and discuss with our guests how to integrate the feminist approach in providing the proper solutions to these urgent problems. As we are approaching to the UN Cop27 on climate change to be held in the Middle East or in the MENA region this year and next year as well, we find this to be an optimal opportunity to talk about climate change and how it relates to the women agenda on peace and security in the MENA region. As the MENA region is seen as one of the most vulnerable regions of the world to climate change implications, and the great damages caused by climate change do not only affect water supplies and food production systems, but they will ultimately lead to greater insecurity and will complicate ongoing conflicts and create an enabling environment for violent extremism. Given that climate change is known at a large scale, and especially when it comes to the climate change impact that leads to greater vulnerability in all societies, women in the MENA region are more at risk to the implications of climate change than others, because already women in the region are victims of flagrant human rights violations under despotic regimes and in areas of conflict where they are disproportionately affected by insecurity, internal migration, poverty, and sexual violence. In today's discussion, we will be tackling a number of topics related to climate change and how it relates to conflicts, peace, and security from a gender-responsive feminist perspective. And we will kickstart our discussion about potential and possible feminist interventions in this regard. Dr. Hanan Awad will be giving the inaugural statement as a representative of the MENA region in WILPF, and as the president of the Palestine chapter. And we also have with us Ms. Michelle Benzinger, the representative of the WILPF working group, and we have with us a number of guests, Noha Sen, president of WILPF Lebanon chapter, as well as Dr. Nadia Sakaf, an independent Yemeni researcher and a research director at Arabia Brain Trust, as well as our beloved colleague Rula Al-Assad, a Syrian feminist researcher and the founder of the Syrian Network of Women, and Ms. Shireen Jandi from WILPF Lebanon chapter. So I would like to go straight away to Ms. Michelle Benzing to give her opening statement. Go ahead, Ms. Benzing.
Thank you very much, Salma. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to see you here this evening for this webinar. My name is Michelle. I'm from the WILPF Germany section, and I have the honor to introduce to you the Environmental Working Group. So this webinar has been organized by the Environment Working Group. It's a group that is basically based in different sections. So there's members from different sections all over the world coming together in this group, working on the topics on the intersections of climate, gender, and disarmament. The group has been established around 3 years ago, and our key message is very simple. There can be no peace if there's no gender justice or environmental justice. And that's why in our activism, we connect topics of environmental justice, climate justice, but also demilitarization in order to very much enhance feminist peace solutions. Because when we look at the climate crisis, right, we also try to look at different intersections. So the intersections of capitalism, militarism, patriarchy, and colonialism, and how these affect not only the people, but also the planet we live on. We do meet every month in our environment working group, and there's also a webpage, particularly on feminism, peace, and environment, which you can find on the WILPF website, wilpf.org. We will also post a link later into the chat. And we do welcome new members. So if you're interested, if these are your topics of passion, please join us. We do need more and more voices and perspectives within our working group. We are already a very diverse group, which is amazing. We really have representatives from all over the world, but we welcome every new perspective that we can get. Besides organizing webinars like these, where we all can come together and discuss very important topics, we also do other things like, for example, research. We do write briefings or also different letters. And we also have delegations within our environment working group. So we did send a delegation to Stockholm Plus 50, and we are also sending a delegation next month to the Conference of the Parties, the Cop27, which will take place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt from the 6th of November until the 18th of November. So we will have a delegation of 10 people in total, different representatives from different regions. And we will be coming together to particularly highlight our message, right? That it's urgent to demilitarize, to decolonize, and to stand up for climate justice. So we are really much one of the key working groups that are actually making the link, saying there needs to be divestment from militaries, and like we need reinvestment into climate finance and also feminist solutions to the climate crisis. Because only if we establish demilitarization can we actually achieve peace and climate justice. And so we educate ourselves in this space. We did so already in August in our first webinar regarding climate impacts on the African continent. We did so in a second webinar as well in September, where we talked about how the West has militarized and impoverished the African continent. And now we're doing this here tonight in our third webinar with the impacts of the climate crisis on women, peace, and security in the MENA region. And I'm really grateful to be here and listen to this amazing panel. And with that, hand it back over to Salma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I would like to thank the interpreter as well, who was running after her. Now, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Hanan. Go ahead, Dr. Hanan. Please turn on your microphone. Unfortunately, it seems that we're facing a technical issue. We cannot hear Dr. Hanan, or perhaps it's a connection problem. We can perhaps come back to you at a later stage. Perhaps meanwhile you can leave the meeting and rejoin. I'm so sorry, but it seems that we cannot hear you, Ms. Awad or Dr. Hanan. Hopefully we'll be able to sort the issue out and we can listen to her intervention at a later stage of our webinar. And now I would like to move straight away to our next speaker, hoping that the problem will be fixed very soon. I will move straight away to Ms. Noah Hussein, head of WILPF Lebanon chapter, and she's the faculty of the Beaux-Arts and Architecture at the Lebanese University, and the General Secretary of the Arab Universities of Beaux-Arts at the Arab Union of Universities. She has received or she has achieved a number of BAs, and she has a PhD in Sustainable Development and Urbanism and Urban Adaptation to Climate Change. Dr. Allow me to ask you the following. What are the possible points connecting climate change and conflicts, and how can we find proper gender-responsive solutions to climate change, especially in the context of Lebanon? Go ahead, Dr. Naha.
Thank you so much. Just not to respond in those questions to the presentation, but if there is a possibility from share PowerPoint, is there a possibility for me to share my PowerPoint? Okay. Merci. I would like to speak about the three variables. I would to have the possible for me to have the presentation. Saying I was about different things, the conflict, gender. Question about the link between the climate change and the conflict. How because we have a lot of impact that say that the elementary 4 dimensions and in
Excuse me, sorry. Sorry to interrupt. The English interpreter can't be heard at all. There seems to be a connection issue. If maybe Fatima could take over until the other interpreter has fixed the connection issue. Thank you.
Talking about the second variable, talking about the security, where there are 5 levels, be it military, economical, aside these other concepts are added, that we're talking about terrorism, criminality, and all of that make it up, Okay, we have two variables. You have conflicts and the environment. We can say there are two types of conflicts. We have direct conflicts, like what is happening presently in Egypt, and we equally have international conflicts, which are indirect. And, the cause of these conflicts are actually immigration. And that really has to do with it reduces the lifespan and even the living conditions of the people. So all of these have repercussions. It's the future of the generations that are jeopardized, and these are things that necessitate or requires really international help. So the new concepts the concept that has been put in place by the United Nations is actually implementing peace, so ensuring the security of all individuals on the planet and even the protection of those who are prone to a crisis. Equally, it has helped us to identify the different characteristics and environmental characteristics. It's very universal for all human beings, and it has been developed for even on the developed countries, but equally, we take into consideration different affectations. So, we're talking about prevention too. So, with these two variables, we're going to see the question of gender. Actually, women and men, women and men in those regions are vulnerable, especially when they need resources for their upkeep. So women are affected in they are obliged to undergo difficulties. They cannot have access to good education, and the women are actually efficient actors of change. We're talking about adaptation and multiplication. So women have a great know-how that can be used in strategies to cope issues that are linked to risks. So equally, they really have in their positions natural resources, and they have the position needed to contribute, to environmental adaptation. So of course, we should adapt sensitive questions linked to gender to respond to humanitarian issues. Well, we're talking about the question in the beginning, we were talking about climate change, and equally the question about security has really made it in such a way that things have really been jeopardized. So the adoption, the 1325 resolution of peace and security has not yet been really implemented in state politics, especially in the region of MENA. So the security politics over there and climate politics are actually based mostly on men, So talking about gender, there is no respect, and even sensitization are gender-based. So they use themes which cannot be adapted to they adopt themes that cannot be adapted to women and men. So women are not really given attention to. So instead, men are given the go ahead, so it becomes difficult because it makes it difficult for women to adopt or really engage. So I want to talk about the question of security, conflicts, and change, and climate change. There are two interactions, two questions that have been asked, first of all, question of gender, on the other way it's responded me, on the other way it's not. So it is we are the ones to really work so that the issue of gender could be a priority, in the analysis and even in politics. So, of course, there are factors there are factors of discrimination between the exposition of women and men, to risks and climate change. There is a difference at the level of education, its dependency to natural resources is becoming so high, the level or the rate of dependence. So, and it's a really difficult question, in our Arab world, especially is because women are not given a lot of importance. And actually, the lack of the engagement or participation of women in the decision-making environments, equally illegal inclusion of men and women in all the processes of climate change, and even political issues are not the same. So the lady doesn't have free access to technology as the man in general. So if I talk about this little country, it's about 740 anyway. It is highly urban, and it is found at it's found at a seaside, and it's a country which is very urban, developed, like 88% of the country are urban, and just about 11 for rural, especially in zones that are around seas. Actually, they are really vulnerable and exposed to climate change. The political stability, actually instability, and even political power attribution is becoming so illegal. And all of that dated since 1960, since the Civil War. So climate change really affects people, and it has really all of what is going on in that arena has promoted insecurity. So in this, I can say, how can I say that? For instance, if I want to, in terms of the population of this country, where on that country, there we find 3.5 million people in need, like in Lebanon. People in Lebanon, 180 Palestinians are refugees in Lebanon, and even some Syrians, about 1,000 people from Syria who are refugees, and equally about 1.8 million people from Syria who are actually displaced. So that's why according to the Minister of External Relations, it is actually, we have more than 1.8 million refugees in that country. So exactly, I'm saying the truth. I'm not just I'm just making up things. All of that causes really social disorder with a persistent political insecurity and incertitude, uncertainty. Equally, community insecurity is growing. We're talking about thieves and harassment. So harassment is mostly towards it's done to women and girls. So we have we equally had a lot of COVID, a lot of illnesses, a lot of diseases that came up, pandemics like the COVID-19, coronavirus, that really has plunged this country into a lot of issues, so there is a really great amount of wide diseases and even insecurity. And sorry, I didn't get that. Yeah, it is actually a very difficult situation to face by the people from Lebanon. Like he mentioned that two countries, Palestine and Lebanon. Lebanon is like the contrary of Palestine. So the population here has become more sad, more, and more insecure. So it's they are part of the world, and the story of Lebanon wasn't like that, has not always been like that. That is the truth, to admit. So talking about food insecurity, we realize that Lebanon is facing inflation. It amounts to 240. Actually, I put the sources, their official sources that I have here. So we, like I said, we are among the people who are mostly affected by this crisis. So we want to say, not to say everything is dark. Let's say there is a little bit of a hope, because since 2019, women are the front of manifestations, talking about corruption, political insecurity, and every other tribalism. So they think at least things are going to change in the nearest future. So talking about climate change, the Ministry of Environment in Lebanon actually has really engaged on an action. So $80 billion of American dollars, have been allocated. So this is to cover up all of the damages that have been caused in the country. And as well, what you see here is actually a sketch from the Ministry of, the Ministry of the Environment. So it actually shows off the issues, and you see that picture over there is actually, a sea. You see sometimes the sea, there are earthquakes, and even sometimes floods, and it really hampers agriculture and every other thing. So yeah, you see, global warming is actually killing cedar trees in Lebanon, and yeah, we are seeing this a picture of the beach just after the war. You see, so we have floats over here. It's everywhere, especially with heavy rainfalls, and so we shouldn't lose hope. At the level of the government, we should actually give priority to management of risk and catastrophe, and even a resilience. So the resilience should be social, and the solution should be social. Equally, we're talking about the sensitization and development and of information, of knowledge, to sharing it with everyone. Equally, promoting entrepreneurship through the private sector to really play a essential roles, thanks to sustainable technological innovations and resistant climate. So at the local level, in Lebanon, I think it has already been so much implemented so far. So Okay. Yeah, there was a recent study, the barometer. You can see that this is a study that has been done with 26 countries and inhabitants of Arab countries. You see the issue with potable water, and you see that we equally have issues of waste that is not really that is just abandoned, and equally water, and equally what really shocked me when I read these reports is when we face a really immediate issues, food insecurity and political instability, civils are mostly concerned. They are more concerned with other issues than the environmental issues. So they share the responsibilities with the government, but they demand a real engagement of the government in the fight against climate change. So in most of these countries, they say the level of environmental sensitization is really high. It's so. Please excuse me. These are some recommendations that I would like to give. Please just bear with me. Thank you, and thank you for your kind attention. I'm done.
Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're going to review your recommendations, and thank you for highlighting the relationship between security, social justice, environment, and highlighting the latest developments in Lebanon. Now we're going to move to Dr. Nadia Sakaf, who's a independent Yemeni researcher who has a long experience in the field of media, gender, democratic transformation, development challenges. Before being head of research at Arabia Brain Trust, that's an economic and political think tank, she was the Minister of Information in Yemen. Dr. Nadia, would like to hear from you what are the potential nexuses between all of these topics and how do they relate to the agenda or feminist agenda for peace and security in the region and specifically in Yemen. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Salman. Maybe I don't have a screen to share, so if you could you don't need to share the screen anymore. So after what my colleague has spoken about the technical terms and the issues that have to do with the theory behind climate change and gender and conflict, I want to take you to the human side of it and tell you a story. So I started my interest in terms of the impact of climate change in 2003. I was working with Oxfam at the time, in the beginning of my career, and I was in a place called Lahj in the south of Yemen, and we were exploring water. And I met with a little girl around 12-ish in her age, and her name was Madeleine. And I was wondering, Madeleine seems like a very strange name for a Yemeni girl. She's not Fatima, or she's not Khadija, she's Madeleine. And it turned out that her mother was obsessed with the Mexican soap operas, the translated dubbed ones. At the time, they were famous and they would listen to them in the TV. And she had a dream for her daughter, different from the reality that they had. Madeleine used to walk 3 hours to fetch water for their farm, for their family, 3 hours going and 3 hours coming back. And so at that time, I felt this is not right. This is, I mean, you can understand that I was living in a protected environment, and suddenly I am facing girls at 12 years old having to walk 3 hours. And the name created for me some sort of disconnect from the reality what she's living. Now, the story of Madeleine is that she was married off at the age of 12 to a Gulf businessman in what we called at the time arranged tourism marriages in 2003. That was a very common thing for people from the Gulf to come to Yemen, marry young girls and leave them after a few months, but they pay a lot of money to the families that were suffering. So that's the story of climate change and how it affects women in particular. And if you look at the nation as a whole, we rank 171 out of the world's 182 at the Notre Dame Global Climate Change Adaptation Index, which means we are the 22nd worst prepared country in the world for climate change. This means that by 2050, our economy will be negatively affected by 24%. Anyway, Yemen is in a war. Anyway, we have a lot of problems. We have poverty. Poverty has reached up to 70%. Food insecurity. We have 17 million Yemenis food insecure. Out of them, around 7 million or 5.6 million who are in the emergency stage of food insecurity. And then you have climate change. We have extreme weather phenomena. We have flash floods. We have desertification. We are even said to be the first country, the first city, Sana'a, the first city in the world to face drought. But on the plus side, something happened. We didn't have electricity because of the infrastructure and the war, and people started using solar power. So in a way, we could be the first green country by force because we've started using solar panels, and even the rural areas, which compose around 75% of the country, live in rural areas. And there's also a downside. Every time I say there's a plus side comes a bad news. The bad news with solar energy is that many of the farmers started using solar panels instead of fuel-based, and they are digging deeper and deeper underground water for their farming. And this means that the underground water is being depleted in a faster way that it is being replenished. So now we see that the effects sometimes, if it's not controlled, if it's done on an ad hoc base, could cause a problem. Going back to the nexus, I want to talk about climate change and women in particular, because earlier this year we had an organized campaign online, and we said that climate change affects women in Yemen particularly. And we faced a very bad backlash. Some of the people were saying, oh yeah, so when a flash flood comes, it only takes the woman. It's the water comes, it says, oh, man, leave him, woman, take her. And this is the perspective of people who don't understand that when we say, like Noha was saying earlier, when climate change affects women differently because women have different access to resources. They are less equipped. For example, in Yemen, not many women know how to swim. So if a flash flood comes, they are more bound to drown if they cannot swim. Also physical ability, women are less mobile. Women do not have access to resources in terms of getting from one place to the other. This is a direct effect on them. Also, another direct effect on them is that a lot of women make up the IDPs, women in internally displaced camps. And so these camps are usually placed, and this is the other link with conflict. So internally displaced camps are usually placed in the area where flash flood comes. And so if something happens, they are already in danger zone. And also underground resources, most of the 70% of the conflicts in Yemen, the local conflicts, not the political ones, between tribal people used to happen because of the water resources. And who gets the water for these people is the women. So the women go and fetch the water, and they are like in the middle of the bombardment. And there are indirect causes. For example, like Madeleine, she had to walk 3 hours to get water. This is a risk. There is also a risk of violence because she could get it early in the morning. She could be raped. She could be attacked, especially now with the conflict. She could step on landmines. Now there is a lot of landmines in different areas of the country, especially the conflict areas. And then, so women, they have to walk long distances. to get water or wood. And because of the lack of fuel, even the Ukraine and Russia crisis has affected Yemen because food security, we can't import wheat, and also because of the fuel crisis. And so people have to rely on wood. We have statistics that says deforestation has increased because people are now going back to chopping wood and using it for domestic uses. And who gets that is often obviously the women. And anyway, because of the conflict, women make up a majority of the rural areas, which has 80% of the country's poor, because men go elsewhere, either to the water, to the front, the battle fronts, or they leave the country. I think I'm going to stop here. I have 2 recommendations, so maybe we can get to them later. But I leave you with the image of Madeleine. Please, when you think about climate change, don't just think about natural disasters. Think about the small things that have to do with infrastructure, with development, with women and little girls' abilities to make a better future for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadia. You made us see the daily impact, the impact on the grassroots of climate change, the impact of climate change on the grassroots and on the individuals, on women, on girls. And thank you for this intervention, for your stories, for your examples. And now I will give the floor from Dr. Nadia to our colleague Rula Al-Assad, Syrian female journalist, feminist, and a trainer in feminist media, content creator, and environmentalist, and a co-founder of the Syrian Female Journalist Network and its executive director. She has an MA in gender studies, in media, culture and arts from Netherlands, and she has a BA in journalism from Damascus University. Rula, when we talk about the Middle East and North Africa, MENA, we cannot put aside the political context and the hegemony of patriarchal and despotic systems in many of the countries of our region. I want to ask you specifically more, how do these factors such as dictatorship, despotism, in exacerbating climate change and climate change impact, and what is the repercussions and how are solutions or how do we are affected by these systems, these tyrannic dictatorship, military systems, and what are the possible solutions that we can think of? Good evening, Salma. Good evening, everyone. In truth, I feel very frustrated because of this issue, especially lately because of many events related to the environmental situation in the country, in the region, and specifically in Syria. Usually I talk about my environmental action that began because of drought, which was the first activity I started with before the war in Syria, and it's the first time I started to shed light on climate crisis in Syria. And now I want to go back to Syria as example, but also to determine the role of the state with regards to climate and climate crisis, because over decades, climate issue was considered as something out of our control as a human, especially in the South, the global South that considers itself victim of development in the global North. Yes, it is true, perhaps we can think of that, but today in Syria, after 11 years of war, we cannot really devoid the state of its role and responsibility of what's going on the level of the climate change. I would like to share some personal experiences related to drought in Syria. Specifically, during the revolution, I used to get questions from researchers, from journalists, trying to link the Syrian revolution with climate change. To me, at the time, all climate change was limited in my head with the drought crisis in the Syrian peninsula, in Hasakeh, Ghamishli, and Deir ez-Zor specifically regions that were called since the 1980s as the food basket of Syria because of wheat and cotton. Where I was asked this question because of my activities before the revolution, is there any nexus between drought and the Syrian revolution and climate change at the time? I had no link, no nexus, no connection. I used to think it's possible, but I'm not sure about that. But today, if I look at how the Syrian government, be it since Hafez al-Assad regime to Bashar al-Assad regime, how there was actually draining these resources, how this patriarchal system looked at Syria as a farm. They drained the natural resources, be it agricultural sector or the extractive industry, of course. But the drought crisis was the most shocking in Syria because its impact was quite tangible. Extractive industries was under the control of the state in fields away from populated areas, i.e. there was no relation with that and natural resources. Hence, there were many decisions by the government, be it Hafez al-Assad, that considered the country as his own farm, and then Bashar al-Assad and the ideology that was ruling in the country, the Ba'ath Party, regarding food security that started since the 1960s. And gave them legitimacy in the rural areas, and how this ideological regime tried to attract first or provide food security was unrealistic, because there was polarization and draining of many rural areas from farmers, their families, female farmers, in order to draft them in the army. There was a priority to militarization at the expense of keeping people in their villages and farms, and this was in the 1970s until the 2000s. But when things turned to worse, there were some agricultural reforms, but there was a draining of water resources. Irrigation really drained the water resources, underground water. Once again, the solutions provided by the government was only to cover up, only to overcome a specific crisis for specific years, but there was a draining of resources. How did this affect us? It affected the food security that we are seeing today, that is not only related to war. It is something that began a long time ago. Poverty, of course, the women are the most poor in the world, and in risky situations, the women are the refugees, the displaced, are those crossing borders legally and illegally. They are the ones who are carrying all the burden, the emotional burden, the caregiving burden. They are the ones that work in the camps because they are the most obedient. And we go back to the stereotyping of women and also girls in these camps, be it in refugee camps, displaced camps, or drought camps in the past. Their impact on women was quite different, because in these vulnerable situations, it's an environmental crisis. There's no water. People left their country, their lands, to cities to find employment opportunities, harsh living conditions, living in tents. Girls had to leave school because they might get work more than their brothers, and the burden exacerbated on women, and they were subject to violence, social violence, and discrimination, even in Syria. Who are they? They are gypsies, of course, and they were stigmatized, discriminated against, and the males were isolated in tents most of the times. This is a small example of how we can link what's going on in Syria today an environmental crisis that began a decade ago, which was personally not understood to me. I did not understand it, but also the agricultural reform policies were also discriminatory. We can see environmental crises from a racist point of view. For example, Arabization policies, the Arab belt, for example, in order to exclude the Syrian Kurds that live in a region known today as the self-administration region that was part of the food basket region of Syria, and the Ba'ath Party and its preferential treatment with regards to providing food, water, and fuel. This really exacerbated the draining of resources and racism and discrimination. There was, of course, also a change in the draining of environment during Bashar al-Assad after 2005 when there was an introduction of the social market and also to implement the German model after World War II, but it failed because only it catered to the needs of international organizations and businessmen like international organizations like the World Bank and IMF, and this did not help because the policies that were implemented at the time with regards to decreasing subsidizing of food, fuel, and removing the social protection network of farmers really impacted vulnerable groups. I'm talking about men, women, girls, children. It exacerbated impact, hence poverty increased, unemployment increased, and by that we go into another vicious circle that this burden again is equally on women and men, but it is more on women because on women, no matter where they are in Syria and no matter in which sector they work. If I want to give examples regarding how the governments, patriarchal governments and ideological governments exploited environments, and because they believe the country as their farm, the ministries of environment, they work as if they are a civil society and they depend on donations. And the Ministry of Environment in Syria was part of the First Lady's office, Asma al-Assad, and I'm saying that because of the nature of activities implemented by the Ministry of Environmental, we have an environmental crisis related to drought. Mrs. Asma al-Assad decides to go on a bike ride in order to overcome air pollution caused by conflict, war, militarization, and the allies of her husband, Bashar al-Assad. She called for people to use bicycles. So there was a link between the Ministry of Environment and the behavior of Asma al-Assad and the types of activities that someone in high position can control these activities. There were no accountability for projects given to rich businessmen or who became rich, and because they are from the entourage of the president, there was no accountability regarding projects, investments. Everything related to environment was something marginal, but today we see how it's impacting Syria, the environment in Syria, and how it's impacting the vulnerable populations in Syria. And after the war, the picture became clearer as a result of militarization and armament. For example, the bombardment on Eastern Ghouta in Damascus, the burning of the ground, the minerals, the heavy minerals like lead, chemical weapons, the sarin gas, that is dispersed and leaves no traces but kills the environment. There was a lot of leftover of bombs, explosives. Today there are landmines, remains of shells and missiles. So and this does not only kill but also causes handicap. There were a lot of missiles that Russian airplanes were experimenting in Syria. Their remains remain active and can kill individuals and environments. All the military equipment that passed through Syria really killed the soil, did not allow the soil to breathe. One of the sentences I've heard, I don't know how accurate it is saying that Syria requires 100 years, not all of Syria, but only where heavy missiles were, of course, bombarded. We need the soil here, I'm talking about the soil needs 100 years in order to regain to become healthy again. I'm talking now about war, armament, militarization. I'm talking about military armed groups. I'm talking about natural resources, which is fuel and oil. At a certain time, people were able to extract oil and sell it, especially in the areas surrounding the resort. But the poisonous gas, because of the primitive refining of oil refining, led to poisonous emissions that affected males and females. It caused skin diseases, pulmonary diseases, respiratory diseases, but its impact on women, especially pregnant women, was exacerbated. It led to the death of the embryo, the distortion of the embryo. Again, the crisis of Syria is cross-border. We know, for example, that is bordering Iraq and bordering Turkey as well. So we can also think how the environmental crisis, not only on a national level, but on a transnational level, because it impacts people disregarding their nationality. The last point I would like to raise, perhaps we cannot determine the impact of war on environment, but we can see that, of course, if there are no long-term environmental solutions, the refugee crisis will continue, the IDP's crisis will continue, the dependency issue will continue, draining of the environmental resources will continue. I believe the recommendation is to have more studies, environmental studies today in Syria, because even after reviewing certain literature, there is few information regarding what's happening in Syria and linking to what's going on in the region. The war in Yemen, war in Syria, and its impact on the region as a whole is very important to understand that we cannot think of environmental issues in a national level. This requires production of knowledge and making the environmental issue a political issue, because there's always a tendency to make the environmental issue an apolitical issue. So we have to have more environmental movement activism in the region, because it is true that people, individuals in the end are providing alternatives. For example, women during the siege in Syria were recycling many remains, even the remains of weapons and missiles. There was, we had domestic agriculture. I believe people and women are able to find environmental alternatives in the hardest of times. And if we want to, we have to rethink the role of the Ministry of Environment and the funding of these small alternatives and projects that are implemented by the people, so they may receive more funds. Thank you, Rula. Really, you shed light on many aspects, on many dimensions, and reminded me of the campaigns of course, the collecting waste campaigns with the First Lady, and this depoliticization of the environmental issue, and how important, as you said, to always discuss the environment and climate, a political discussion, and to look at it from a political point of view. Thank you. Last but not least, I'll give the floor to our colleague Shireen Al-Jardi. Shireen is member of WILPF Lebanon. She's currently She currently the Stop Killer Robots campaign. She was the regional representative of the MENA region in the International Council of WILPF. Shireen joined the executive committee of the Green Party in Lebanon to work on the nexus between climate change, environmental advocacy. Shireen, you were in the meeting of the feminist meeting on climate change that was held in Jordan. Can you share with us the main results, outputs, outcomes, and recommendations of the meeting, especially with regards to the participation of women?
Let me thank also the working group on environment and thank WILPFers who are attending here with us, the speakers. And just listening here to the degradation of the human security variables in MENA, listening to all these patriarchal, militarized, hegemonic ideologies that we are facing in MENA, to the context of conflict. And maybe Hanan did not have the chance to speak, but definitely she would also correlate the impact of occupation on climate and gender. With all this, just like now listening to all these amazing and it makes one like sometimes lose hope, but for us this is the drive. And now I feel and I get like energized every time I see like where do I get that drive to keep on working, and it's out of the life that we live. If we do not do this, who's going to do what we're doing? All of this, like if we've seen like the whole presentations, I'm glad that what we did as because I'm also part of the Arab feminist CSOs network. So this is the Arab States, the Arab States CSOs and feminist network, which is the organizing network for this regional work where we met in Jordan. Just to give a brief about this network was created. It's a recent network. It's a very new born network. It was just prior to Beijing 25 and to the Generation Equality Forum, where it was also founded in Jordan as a part of network, also to put forward the work of CSOs and grassroots organization at the front, and also to push governments in the region to look for the participation of women as such. Just to like mention the members of the steering committee who worked hard to make this regional conference a success: Dr. Fatma Khafaja, Randa Senora, Fatma Otalib, Noha Mehrez, Najwa Ibrahim, and Noha, yeah. So these are, and me. So we are the steering committee. It's out of just the things that were mentioned here. We were talking about the impacts of climate. Lots of women in the network, we were talking about climate nexus, environment, but still we were not making this nexus and how it's also within gender. So we had the first webinar. The first webinar, we had many participants, many of them talking about their interest to know more about what is climate and the nexus and how we can move forward in MENA, especially like at that time there was this dust storm in Iraq. Everybody knew that there's an implications on the health system, just like now, as Rola was saying, with environment, we go beyond the borders. And that was the work that we had. We started with a webinar. There was lots of interest, but still we saw that there are lots of expertise on one hand and lots of acquired knowledge on another. So we had a training, and we had like our WILPF colleague, WILPF Lebanon colleague, who did that training at the regional level. After that, we did a policy paper, a regional one, until also we got now Nadia was telling us that she started with Oxfam, and it was also Oxfam who saw the great work that the Arab states CSOs and feminist network was doing, and decided to help in the objective to see like what is the road and the preparation to COP27. At lots of time we see that just like now what Rola, Dr. Hussaini and Nadia were saying, these are things that we are discussing among ourselves, maybe not with much expertise, but still there's an impact on the lives of women in MENA, especially within the context, frame of context. And so we were supported by Oxfam to meet in Jordan. We have 10 recommendations. Let me read for you the final part, and which is like the declaration that will be disseminated prior to the COP and to the delegations. And it's very much, it fits all the discussions that we had here. And it gives me such like a satisfaction to see that the recommendations that we had are really indeed part of what women in MENA need, because they also were part of papers that were prepared by different countries, whether Tunisia, Morocco, Iraq, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Yemen. So we had different papers that the network had. Let me start with the third. So the recommendations were assigned to governments, to CSOs, and to UN agencies. So we have different stakeholders. First, the Arab governments should disseminate simple information on climate change and its different implications for all populations, especially those vulnerable to climate change. This would enable us to make relevant decisions. So definitely we're talking here about data collection. Second, ensure the integration of gender into all national policies and programs that address the effects of climate change, including locally determined contributions. Third, ensure the full participation of civil society, which represents the needs of the groups affected and promotes feminist perspectives. Four, raise awareness and build the capacities of participants from official delegations on all climate conferences and events addressing gender and climate issues. Emphasize the importance of including women with professional and practical experience, and also youth leaders in official delegations and negotiations. 6, equal representation and effective participation of women, girls, people with disabilities, indigenous populations, and different groups of young people in all solutions to adapt to and mitigate climate change. 7, urge governments to develop and finance gender action plans related to the climate. Appoint a gender liaison officer to be available to women's organizations active in the environment and climate, and provide opportunities for these organizations to hold governments accountable for failure to implement these plans. The second one, climate justice requires that women, girls, and low-income groups be included in decision-making, implementation, and effective access to climate finance policies and actions. Seventh, the United Nations is responsible for facilitating the process of accreditation and participation of civil society in international and regional forums and in events related to climate justice, ensuring security and safety of civil society organizations accredited to the conference. 9th, the United Nations has a key role in integration the agenda of women, peace, and security into processes of dialogue and reconciliation, especially in areas experiencing conflict and instability. The last point is that the United Nations has a major role to play in halting armed conflict and colonial projects within the Arab world. Such situations have very dangerous implications for climate justice, especially the distribution of water and land resources. So we see in that, we have also a report. The report, unfortunately, I thought it will be delivered by the time we have this conference to share it with you, but maybe we can at later stages. Maybe we can share it also with the participants in here. Definitely the work is cumulative. It's a process. And what we do at within the climate nexus, this is something that we need to do together. We need to do it together holistically and in a transparent way, so that we can tackle the issues that are underfunded, under-resourced, and unfortunately without having women at negotiation tables or at COPs to discuss it. Now it's the perfect timing for us. Now it's an African COP in an Arab country. Next year is going to be an Arab COP in the UAE. We hope to have a continued discussion on these relevant information and negotiations that we can do together. Thank you, Salma, and back to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting you. If you have anything else to add, please go ahead. And thank you for being with us. And thank you for shedding light on the situation in the region, the organization, the network that you are working in. And as you have mentioned, as Arula mentioned, it's very important to look at the issue from a regional and international perspective, not only from a local and national perspective. So thank you. Thank you very much. We don't have a lot of time left. This is why I would like to give the floor to our other colleagues, participants. If you have any recommendations, I know you have recommendations as to how you perceive. So if you have any recommendations, if anyone from the participants, if you have any questions to ask, if you have any interventions, you can share your questions via chat or via the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. I'll begin with, if I may, can I begin with Dr. Noha? If you have any recommendations, please go ahead, ma'am. Would you like me to speak in Arabic or in French?
Exam, elaboration of the politics, and equally people's testimonies could be based on what they have lived or observed, and equally those who have encountered solutions. And but we should watch that justice, solutions of justice should really take into consideration everybody, and so taking into consideration gender and race, sexuality, equality of sex. All of this is very important to really arrive at a perfect solution to cope with climate change. So that's actually what I wanted to share. So it seems that I have already concluded my intervention, just as I said earlier when I was talking. So what I'm trying to say, talking about the question, let's consider the question of masculinity, and because it actually is part of the question or the issue of climate change. So we need to take that into consideration to get to an expected end. Actually, I had difficulty speaking because I can hear the interpretation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Hussaini, for linking all of these issues. Dr. Nadia, I also know that you have some recommendations. Please go ahead, ma'am. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I just have two quick recommendations. The first is research. We need to collect data at the local level and also from the perspective of all the stakeholders. We need to understand how climate change and conflict affects not just women and men differently, but also different groups, rural and urban, disability, access, people who have access and people who don't have, children, and so on. And the other recommendation has to do with creating bodies. We have to have independent bodies that bring all stakeholders to address disaster if it comes, or to address policy that has to do with climate change and development, sustainable development in general. And these bodies have to be at the national level, but they have to also be at the local levels. Like there has to be a linkage between local and the national, but there has to be an institution, a reference point where people can go to and find information, and also that creates policy. Selma, I just want to alert you that Dr. Hanan is already with us now, and she didn't get the chance to speak. So maybe this is her chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadia. So I'll give the final word to Dr. Hanan if she's with us online. But prior to that, Rula, you've mentioned some recommendations, but if you have any other recommendation, please go ahead. The floor is yours. I'm fine. I just mentioned my recommendations during my intervention. Thank you. Thank you, Salma. Dr. Hanan? We would like to hear from you again. If you're online with us, Dr. Hanan, are you able to hear us? Dr. Hanan, are you with us? Dr. Hanan, we're unable to hear you, unfortunately. We really would have loved to hear from you today. We really would have loved to hear from you, to hear your intervention, because we would have loved to see you, hear you, and to learn more about the connection between between our topic today and what's going on in Palestine. Unfortunately, we're unable to hear Dr. Hanan. Hopefully, we have to hold more discussions, as our colleague Shireen mentioned. We just started these discussions, and we will continue with them after Cop27. And we want to hear more about these issues, the triple nexus, if we say, between security, climate, and gender in the MENA region, specifically in Palestine, where the situation in Palestine, the role of occupation in exacerbating the impact of environmental crisis and climate change. There's a final question. I know that there was a question from Michelle about the nexus between the national action plans, the NAPs, and the WPS, and its nexus with climate change. If we can use this action plan and these tools to assist us and to help us. I don't know if someone would like to answer. If we have experts on climate change and we have experts on WPS as well. If I may I answer this question? Shireen? Dr. Noha, please go ahead. The floor is yours. In brief, I would like to say, we do not want to give a lot of importance if there is no implication. As I've said, I see a lot of discrepancy. It's not enough for the governments and Ministry of Environments to send the UN that they did this and that, and it's not implemented in reality on the ground. This is why we have to have active civil society to hold the government accountable. This is our problem in Lebanon. I really get deep into the figures, go deep into the figures, and I find what the government sent to the UN as a result of their actions and reality, there's a big discrepancy between both. I just wanted to shed light on that because we are having a lot of problem in that respect in Lebanon. Sorry for cutting you, Shireen. Thank you, Dr. Husseini. Just for as a reminder, all speakers, please, when speaking, just click on the channel relevant to the language you are speaking in. Thank you very much. Thank you for staying with us. I know we went a bit above time, but it was a very interesting discussion, enriching discussion. And we have to continue with the discussion, to talk about situation in Palestine with Amal, to talk about situation in Iraq, the repercussion of environmental threat and vulnerability on the situation in Iraq. Hopefully, we will continue with these discussions and we will enrich this agenda and feminist advocacy and feminist action on environment and climate justice. I would like to thank Rula, Dr. Nadia, Shireen, Dr. Noha, and Michelle, Dr. Hanan, and hopefully next time we will be able to have an intervention from Dr. Hanan. And I would like to thank the team, the Environment Working Group, the WILPF, and the MENA team, would like to thank the interpreters as well and the participants. I thank you. I know we went a bit overboard over time. We would like to invite you to listen to the latest podcast produced by the WILPF MENA program. The latest podcast is entitled Women in the Face of Climate Change and Conflicts Between Palestine, Yemen, and Syria. Again, it's called Political. The podcast name is Political is Personal. There's a link to the podcast in the chat. You can listen to it as well via the MENA Hub on WILPF's website and on Apple, Google, Spotify, Anchor, or wherever you get your podcasts, as they say. Thank you for your attention and have a good evening. Thank you.